Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on supporting executive functioning in infants and toddlers. Better Brains for Babies is happy and excited to have you with us. This is our fourth in a series of webinars, and we are pleased that you're able to join us today. I am not going to spend a lot of time on details. I do want to quickly familiarize those of you who have not used this interface before with the controls that you have. At the top under your name, you'll see the most important thing that you'll see is a box with a check mark. That is a yes or no response. There will be times it will also become a multiple choice response. If you see that box, would you choose the drop down and click either yes or no so that I know that you can see what I'm talking about? That's going to be a tool that we're going to use a fair amount throughout the course of this webinar. So this will give you a chance to provide feedback. I want to thank our presenter, Holly Higgins Wilcher, for being here with us today. I've known Holly for a long time. She was a graduate student in our program at the University of Georgia in Human Development and Family Science. She is a senior research analyst for 0 to 3. She has a wide range of experience in the early childhood field, including home visiting, infant toddler programming, distance learning, early intervention, professional development. And she has worked with 0 to 3 since 2011. She's also currently a doctoral student in educational leadership and policy studies at the University of Denver. So Holly, we are glad to have you here. Holly has asked me to let everybody know that she is very happy for people to ask questions throughout, and so you can do that either by typing in the chat box or by using the hand raise button, which is next to the check mark button that you just used, to indicate that you want to speak. So, Holly, thank you very much for being here with us. We'll let you go ahead and get started.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Diane. Is my audio okay? It sounds all right? Yes, good. Okay. All right. Well, I'm just so delighted to be here with all of you today. I see some familiar names on the chat screen, and many of you I've worked with and admire so much, and so it's very humbling to be able to share with you today some information on how we can support this essential skill development in infants and toddlers and into preschool. And over the next hour or so, we're going to be discussing the following. Well, hopefully, as a result of our time together, you'll be able to do the following things. Identify the skills that constitute executive functioning, identify how the infant brain shapes executive functioning and related skills, and identify how risk factors that can disrupt executive functioning, identify those risk factors that can disrupt executive functioning skill development, and finally explore how to nurture executive functioning skill development in young children. We're going to explore a little bit of research in the middle too that's interwoven throughout, and as Diane said, I encourage you to chat questions throughout, and we'll have some Q&A time at the end. So first of all, I want to start off and see who's here. I see your names, but I'm not sure what capacity you serve in the early childhood field and how you directly or indirectly impact executive functioning development in the classroom or through policy implementation or through teaching. So if you could take some time in your chat room to just type your role. I'm just going to take a look and see the myriad of roles and careers that we have here. Okay, see higher education faculty, trainers and adult educators, nurse home visitors, early intervention, parent educators, college counselors, trainers, EC consultants. I apologize if I didn't list the role on one of the choices, so please feel free to fill that in. High school, early intervention. I'm sure you wear many hats, and probably many of you have many of these roles listed here, so it's really great to see what capacity you might be using this information in the future. Okay, we're going to dive right into, just as a quick warm-up, explore and remind ourselves of what executive functions are. And executive function self-regulation skills are the mental processes that allow us to plan, focus our attention, remember instructions, and juggle multiple tasks simultaneously and successfully at that. So you can see activation, focus, effort, emotions, memory, action, a lot of important pieces that help us do our jobs every day, working with children and indirectly or directly. And again, executive function self-regulation skills depend on 3 types of brain activities working together simultaneously: working memory, mental flexibility, and self-control. These functions are highly interrelated, and successful application of executive function skills requires them to operate in coordination with each other. And each type of executive function skill draws, much like the 3 types of brain functions, working memory, mental flexibility, and self-control, each type of executive function skill draws on elements of those and others. As we know, in most real-life situations, these don't work in isolation, they work together. And I'm seeing a few more roles popping in with early education teachers, technical assistants, so thanks for letting me know who you are and continuing to do that. In this next slide, you'll see the executive function skills listed a little bit differently, and sometimes these skills are referred to as soft skills, and emotional intelligence is highly associated. So they may look like conscientiousness, perseverance, curiosity, social ability, self-confidence, cooperativeness, empathy, emotional stability, and self-regulation. Just a couple other ways to label some of these executive functions. So here's a poll. I want to know, what executive functions and or soft skills do you rely on most to do your job? If you could pick the top 3 and chat those in the chat box, that'd be great. Those in the chat box. That'd be great. All of them, says Molly. Yeah, it's hard to pick just one. And you're probably using them simultaneously. Cooperativeness, sociability, conscientiousness. Some of you have top 3. Perseverance. Yes, all highly valued, and we'll get to some research about how potential employers value these as well. Thanks for sharing, everyone. I'm going to move ahead to the next slide. So again, just a reminder, executive functioning relies on these 3 types of brain processes. And let's look at what this looks like in young children. For working memory, we know it governs our ability to retain and manipulate distinct pieces of information over short periods of time. So children might be learning a multi-step process like long division, or remembering the rule our teachers shared with us about taking turns or multiple step instructions. In terms of mental flexibility, this helps us sustain and shift our attention in response to different demands, or to apply different rules in different settings, adjust to changing demands. And how can a child adapt to changes in the rules in a game, perhaps, or having a plan and then revising it? Without mental flexibility, we struggle, and we're completely lost in the modern workplace. As you saw, you needed all of those skills earlier. And children use this to learn exceptions to rules of grammar or different ways to arrive to the same solution. A toddler may be working with wheels in a play area, and another child may be coming over to that play area and want to manipulate the wheels in a different way, and that takes some mental flexibility. And finally, inhibitory self-control. This construct enables us to set priorities and resist those impulsive actions or responses. Can you stop yourself from responding in an impulsive way when someone says something that you disagree with? You likely remember that famous marshmallow test where the child has a marshmallow in the room. The researcher comes in and says, you can eat this marshmallow now, but if you wait 15 minutes, I'll give you 2 marshmallows. So that waiting, that child's ability to wait for that second or that third marshmallow is a huge practice of inhibitory self-control. and waiting until we're called on. Red light, green light, and Simon Says, things that practice building inhibitory control. And inhibitory control also relates to our ability to ignore distractions and stay on task later on in school. And you've likely heard of the comparison of a child's brain to an air traffic control system. Much like a busy airport safely manages the arrivals and departures of many aircraft on multiple runways, the baby's brain is working so hard to develop those skills to filter out multiple distractions, to prioritize tasks, set and achieve goals, and control those impulses. So it's working really, really hard. Even though we can't see it, we know that it's managing multiple demands and needs a lot of support from us to do so. And this next table illustrates, or this graph rather, illustrates some tests that were measuring different forms of executive function skills. And the results of the test indicate that executive function begins to develop shortly after birth with, you can see this spike, this critical window between 3 and 5, this window of opportunity for dramatic growth in these skills. And the development continues through adolescence into early adulthood, and you see plateaus here at a certain point. And the rudimentary signs of these capacities emerge toward the end of that first year of life. And by age 3, most children can organize themselves to complete the tasks that involve following 2 rules. So if it's red, put it here. If it's blue, put it there. That's showing that they can direct and redirect their attention to make deliberate choices, that mental flexibility, maintain focus in face of distractions, that inhibitory control, and then hold rules on line mentally as they're figuring things out, that working memory. And so, again, why is it important? Executive skills are important throughout life, as you identified earlier. You need these, all of them, to do our jobs well. And when children have the opportunity to develop executive function and self-regulation skills successfully, we all benefit. They benefit individually, and society benefits. We see this through school readiness and achievement. Executive function skills help children remember and follow multi-step instructions and avoid distractions. And for society, the outcome is a better educated population capable of meeting the challenges of the 21st century and participating in the 21st century workforce. They impact positive behaviors. Executive functions helps children develop skills of teamwork and leadership, decision-making, critical thinking. And so for society, the outcome is a more stable communities, reductions in crime, and greater social cohesion. And good health. Executive function helps us make good choices about nutrition, exercise, helps us resist pressure to take risks, try drugs, and to be more conscientious of our safety of ourselves and our children. Having good executive function primes our biological systems and coping skills to respond well to stress. And we'll talk about stress in a little bit and how that can also be an inhibitor of self-control. For society, the outcome is a healthier population, period. And finally, successful work. Executive function skills increase our potential for economic success because we're better organized and able to solve problems that require planning, and we're prepared to adjust to changing circumstances. And we know in the field of early childhood, the climate and this environment is always changing. So maybe this is why we're so good with these skills. For society, the outcome is greater prosperity due to our innovation, competent, and flexible workforce. Okay, so now you have a poll here. True or false? In the 2006 study, teamwork was identified as more important to potential employers than reading proficiency. And you're going to have a check mark up here, and I'm going to give you a second to note your answer. Yes, I will talk a little bit louder and a little bit slower. Okay, we've got some answers coming in. So far, all truths. All right, great. So the answer is yes, that was true. This table shows the results of a study done in 2006, and I'm wondering if it would be updated. It'd probably likely be the same, where employers indicated the importance of the following characteristics of incoming college graduates to a job or high school graduates to a job. And you can see that many skills indicative of high levels of executive functioning are noted here as higher than even reading and mathematics competency and science. So very important to employers, and more important than, you know, things like IQ and other things. So that we would maybe immediately value thinking about coming out and having the smarts and intellect. It's a much more richer, complex picture than that to employers. Okay, you've got another true or false here. Babies are born with executive functioning skills. True or false? True. We're getting lots of truth in the chat. You can chat in the chat box, or true to an extent. Okay. True. Saying lots of truths. Okay. It's actually false. While these skills are not innate, we are able to develop these skills through interactions and practicing beginning at birth. So true to a certain extent was correct. Children aren't born with the skills, but they are born with the potential to develop them. Executive function improves considerably in early childhood. The difference between an infant and a preschooler are enormous, whereas infants are largely stimulus-bound, reacting immediately to events near them, and oriented to the present. Preschoolers may think about the past and plan for the future, considering several options and then selecting one. However, preschoolers' ability, as you've probably seen in the classroom and outside of the classroom, ability to consciously control their thoughts, actions, and emotions is still severely limited. And quite often their knowledge about what they should do surpasses their ability to actually do it. And they can be unable to do the quote-unquote right thing. But when children have these opportunities to develop executive function, self-regulation skills, we know that everyone benefits. These skills are crucial to learning and development, and they enable positive behavior. And when a 3-year-old begins to learn how to wait or take turn, we're seeing that nascent skill of inhibitory control being developed there. So this next slide, we'll talk about what this looks like under development. In one demonstration, Piaget in 1954 played a hide-and-seek game with his 9-month-old daughter, Lucine, using 2 cloths separated by about 10 centimeters. He first placed the doll under one cloth, and we'll call it location A, and this was easy. Lucine retrieved the doll immediately. Piaget then placed the doll under another cloth, location B, as Lucine watched carefully. Remarkably, Lucine persisted in searching for that doll under the first cloth, committing what is known, as you might know and be familiar with, the A not B error. And even more remarkably, Lucine sometimes looked intently at that correct location even while she reached an error for the old location, as if she knew on some level where that doll was hidden. And errors like this are described as preservative. When someone perseveres in behaving in a way that's no longer appropriate, often despite knowing what they're supposed to do, preservative errors are classic examples of failures of executive function. By observing these errors and watching how children eventually overcome them, researchers can track the development of executive function even in children who are too young to speak. And Lucine was by no means unusual, as we know. Hundreds of scientific studies have now shown that most babies between the ages of 8 and 12 months of age will commit that A not B error under some circumstances. However, after about 12 months, babies are much less likely to make this error in situations like the one just described. Instead, they keep a goal in mind, and they aren't as easily distracted, for example, by the sight of the initial location and a tendency to search there again. Over the course of the second year of life, children become increasingly skilled at orchestrating cognitive processes required to solve problems such as these. This occurs to some extent because children are starting to acquire language and use language to regulate their behavior. And naturally finding a hidden object, even at the new B location, is a lot easier if one is able to say to oneself something like, "It's over there, location B." And as children get older, language comes to play an increasingly conspicuous role in executive function and development. In perspectives on rules, and this next slide we'll talk about perspectives on rules. And from different levels of conscientiousness, 2-year-olds represent one rule such as flowers go here. 3-year-olds reflect on rules and can represent the contrast between 2 rules such as flowers go here versus cards go there. 4-year-olds reflect on the representation of the contrast between these 2 rules such as result. They can consider the relation between 2 incompatible pairs of rules such as shapes versus colors. And changes underlying, and according to one theory, in Zalazzo's level of conscientiousness model, the progression in children's rule use from 2 to 3 to 4 years of age well illustrates an important general feature of development of executive function. With development, children are increasingly able to reflect on their own representations. For example, just intending to do something, to knowing that they're intending to do something, to knowing that they know this, and so on. And it increases in the extent to which children can reflect on their representations. At increasingly higher levels of conscientiousness, it allows them to formulate and use more complex sets of rules for regulating their own behavior. Whereas a 2-year-old can get her mind around a simple directive, put the red ones here, a 4-year-old can exact a more meaningful illustration of that and sort by more complex categories and shapes, such as shapes and sizes, etc. So again, going back to that kind of critical development you see here, this graph represents the developmental spurts in executive function. And you can see there's a developmental spurt at 12. For goal setting, there's a developmental spurt at 14 for working memory, and then developmental spurt at 16 for attentional capacity. So I think about this every time I think about the when children are given their learner's permits to drive, and I'm thinking, it's just starting here. Should we wait a little bit until 18 until it's plateaued a little bit more? But what do we know about science in impacting policy? So the next little bit we're going to use to talk about disruptions in executive functioning. And we know that you see every day the evidence of disruptions in executive functioning. And if children don't get what they need from their relationships with adults and the conditions in their environment are worse, if those influence are sources of toxic stress, their skill development can be seriously delayed or impaired. That said, science shows that there are opportunities throughout development to provide children, adolescents, and the adults who care for them with relationships, environments, and skill-building activities that will enhance their executive functioning capacities. It's just easier, less cost-effective, and more effective to get them straight from the start, right? Okay. I've just got a comment here. Many young children are being expelled from early learning facilities because early childhood teachers are not trained in executive functioning skills. You got it, absolutely, and a lot of other groups of things, and supporting positive behavior and so forth, and social and emotional development, executive functioning, so inextricably related. So, so important to support executive functioning early and prevent these disruptions in executive functioning, since we have this critical window from birth, of course, but even more critical window from 3 to 5. But the terms positive, tolerable, and toxic stress, I want to just reiterate, refer to the stress's response system effect on the body and not to the stressful event itself. Because of the complexity of stress response system, the 3 levels are not clinically quantifiable. They're simply a way of categorizing the relative severity of responses to stressful conditions. And the extent to which stressful events have lasting adverse effects is determined in part by an individual's biological response, which is mediated by genetic predispositions and the availability of supportive relationships, yay, that help moderate the stress response, and in part by the duration, the intensity, and timing of the context of a stressful experience. So here you see the factors that disrupt executive function: toxic stress, neglect, abuse, lack of and/or unhealthy relationships. Anything that disrupts that healthy development of brain architecture is a disruption in executive functioning, unfortunately. Which is why it's so important to promote, develop resilience. We know that not every child has this perfect trajectory of pro-social, caring, nurturing relationships and might not be able to fit this perfect formula of developing optimal executive functioning. However, as child care practitioners and policymakers, we can help reduce the effect of significant adversity on children's healthy development. And it's so essential to our society. Science tells us that some children develop resilience or the ability to overcome serious hardships while others do not. Why? Well, science tells us why. Understanding why some children do well despite adverse early experiences is crucial because it can inform more effective policies and programs that help more children reach their full potential. One way to understand the development of resilience is to visualize a balance scale or a seesaw, as you see here. And protective experiences like those nurturing, positive, pro-social adult relationships and coping skills on one side counterbalance that significant adversity in another. Resilience is evident when a child's health and development tips towards positive outcomes, even when a heavy, heavy load of risk factors is stacked on negative outcome side. And over time, cumulative impact of positive life experiences and coping skills can shift the fulcrum's position, making it easier to achieve those positive outcomes. And having strong executive functioning skills is a huge way to tip that protective factor scale to build positive outcomes. So you have another poll here. I want to ask you, which of the following does research show is the strongest protective factor in supporting resilience of children at risk? And I'm going to give you a second to pick your option. Which one is the strongest protective factor in supporting resilience of children at risk? Seeing lots of B's here. You can type or you can choose from the options here. I see lots of B's chosen and then also chatted. Oh, you're all in the right field. To our advantage, the single most common protective factor for children who develop resilience, the single most effective, is not a costly intervention. It's at least one stable and committed relationship with a supportive parent and caregiver or another adult. It doesn't have to be. It can be from a coach, from someone at church or synagogue. And also research has identified a common set of factors that predispose children to positive outcomes in the face of significant adversity. And individuals who demonstrate resilience in response to one form of adversity may not necessarily do so to the other. But when we use those positive influences, like we mentioned, to stack the scale, we can counterbalance those negative impacts. So some of the top 4 ways facilitating supportive adult-child relationship builds that resilience. Helping that children build a sense of self-efficacy, their belief in their ability to do things, and perceived control, their internal locus of control. I have control over what happens to me. And then providing those opportunities to strengthen those adaptive skills and self-regulatory capacities. And then finally, mobilizing sources of faith and hope and cultural traditions. These 4 ways are what research says are the best ways we can stack the scales to promote resilience in children who face multiple risks and adversity. The next slide, we're going to just highlight a little bit of the most recent research that's come out regarding executive functioning. And some of it's maybe new to you and some of it may be just validating. And studies dealing with the emergence of the development of basic information processing abilities have figured prominently in recent literature on infants. And a number of abilities similar to those found in older children and adults have been putatively identified in infancy, and these include processing sound, attention, memory, and aspects of abstraction or representation involved reasoning. In one 3-year-old study by Rose and Associates, she found the first evidence that abilities in infancy predict executive functioning at age 11. Researchers assessed information processing abilities in 3 domains: attention, processing speed, and memory, when participants were infants, 7 and 12 months, and toddlers, 24 and 36 months, and were used to predict 3 executive functionings: working memory, inhibition, and shifting, when participants were 11 years old. A model relating infant ability to age 11 executive functions fit very well and accounted to from 9% to 19% of variance in executive functions, and passed from both speed and memory in infancy to age 11. Working memory were significant, as was passed from speed to infancy in age 11 and shifting. And a model using abilities in toddlerhood as predictors fit similarly. And these findings implicate early basic cognitive abilities and the development of executive functioning in early adolescence. And there are 2 reasons to entertain the notion that these early appearing abilities might have long-term implications for complex cognitive functions. First, although cognitive abilities are assessed very differently in infants and adults, mounting evidence indicates that there are significant continuities from infancy to later years. And in one study in the 90s by Sigmund and Associates involving preterm infants, neonatal attention indexed by look duration was even found to relate to selective attention at 12 years. In the second study, we're going to talk about the effect of prenatal risk on toddlers, and effortful attention at age 27 months became non-significant once genetic influences were considered in the model. In addition, these genetic influences had unique effects on toddler effortful attention. But latent growth modeling, another scientific modeling approach, indicated that increases in toddler negative emotionality from 9 to 27 months were associated with poor delay of gratification and poor language development. And similar results were obtained in models incorporating birth father data. In the third study, EF, or executive functioning abbreviated, at the beginning of preschool was a significant predictor of receptive vocabulary at the end of preschool, controlling for receptive vocabulary at the beginning of preschool. However, receptive vocabulary skills at the beginning of preschool do not predict executive function skills at the end of preschool, controlling for executive functioning at the beginning. These findings suggest a very important role that executive functioning plays in supporting growth in receptive vocabulary skills, above and beyond earlier vocabulary levels, which is fascinating. And the direction of the developmental pathway between executive functioning and vocabulary in the preschool years, just incredible results. This discussion highlights the need for further research and optimal approach for supporting children's executive skill development in preschool to impact other developmental domains such as language. In this next study, the focus you'll see was examining associations among early maternal behaviors and infant frontal brain electrical activity and a child's executive functioning at age 4 and following kindergarten. And what researchers found is infant frontal electrocephalogram was collected from 56 infants at 10 months of age, and maternal positive affect was observed. Children completed executive function measures in the research laboratory at age 4, and parental reported executive functioning was obtained following children's kindergarten year. Maternal positive affect and infant frontal brain electrical activity measured when children were 10 months jointly and uniquely predicted both preschool and post-kindergarten executive functioning. These findings suggest parenting behavior and brain development in infancy are also precursors of later self-regulatory executive functioning. And finally, in this last paper is a literature review drawing mainly on 20 or so significant and good quality peer-reviewed studies that make up the evidence base for mindfulness in the young children, along with some comments on the policy context, which is a really great kind of semi-meta-analysis of mindfulness and executive functioning. And the findings found that work on mindfulness with young people is popular with staff and students that have a developing presence and can be effective. Mindfulness can be effective in promoting a very wide range of outcomes when well taught and practiced regularly. So it's been shown to be capable of improving mental health, well-being, mood, self-esteem, self-regulation, positive behavior, and academic learning. And there are many possible promising locations for mindfulness within mainstream education in K-12 and in early childhood, including work to improve on mental health, well-being for staff and students, social and emotional learning, special education, mainstream subject-based work. And mindfulness is a new growth area. Work with adults, we've probably seen a little bit more in the workplace. We've had a very strong convincing evidence base, but work with young children, although rapidly developing, is much younger, and this review in this paper is one of only a handful attempting to bring it to a wider professional awareness. So lots of great emerging research on mindfulness practices in supporting executive functioning. Okay, we've taken some time to look at the recent research, and it's probably all garbly, so I'm going to give you a chance to reflect and answer a polling question here. Children are more likely to build effective executive function skills if the important adults in their lives are able to do which of these? Which is the most important? And you can choose from your polling option at the top, A, B, C, D, or E, or you can chat your response. Seeing almost all these are already experts in executive functioning. This is awesome. A simple task like helping a toddler following the steps of setup and cleanup for a lunch. They are filtering out multiple distractions, just everyday things that you're doing while focusing on a task. And we've found that children are more likely to build effective executive function skills if the important adults in their lives are able to do all of the following. So all of those that you mentioned and then some. And I'm going to give you a chance to read over these. That challenging toddler's working memory and inhibitory control. Children's play, social play, is believed to be an important practice ground for the development of executive functioning skills. Not testing, not necessarily sitting still and completing a task, but it's all kinds of things. It's all kinds of opportunities that we give them to practice. Sitting still, being active, guiding them, modeling. Partly this is because children need to test for themselves the skills that adults have been scaffolding for them. So, for example, they have to come up with their own plan for playing house, for communicating with their friends, as your teachers have modeled for them. And just kind of this may look familiar. We talked about the importance of building protective factors. The critical factors in developing a strong foundation for these essential skills are children's relationships. Relationships that all boils down to that, right? The activities that they have opportunities to engage in and the places where they live and learn. So first, for relationships, we know that children develop an environment of relationships, and this starts at home, extends to caregivers, teachers, medical, human service professionals, home visitors, early interventionists, you name it, all of you are here. And children are more likely to build effective executive functioning skills if the important adults in their lives are able to support their efforts, all of the things that we mentioned back here in the last slide. And also have those opportunities for engagement. Building these abilities in young children requires communities and caregivers to provide supportive experiences that promote social and emotional cognitive development. And in so doing, reduce stress, foster social connections, incorporate vigorous physical exercise into daily activities, which has been shown to positively affect stress levels, social skills, and brain development, that vigorous physical activity. Increasing complexity of skills, step by step, finding each child's zone of being challenged but not frustrated. We know each child has that zone, right? And that's how we individualize. including repeated practice of skills over time where we can celebrate that success by setting up opportunities for children to learn in the presence of supportive mentors and peers in all the places where they spend those times in those natural environments. So this next slide takes us to how adults can promote development of skills that support infant and toddler executive functioning. And you can see they're all listed here, but providing the support that children need to build these skills at home in early care and education programs and other settings they experience regularly is one of our biggest and most important responsibilities. Growth-promoting environments provide children with scaffolding that helps them practice necessary skills before they must perform them by themselves. And we can facilitate that development of the nascent or that emergent executive functioning skills by establishing dependable routines, things you're already doing. I hope you're feeling validated. Modeling social behavior, creating and maintaining supportive, nurturing, pro-social, reliable relationships. And it's also important for children to exercise those developing skills through activities that foster creative play and social connection, teaching them how to cope with stress, involving vigorous exercise over time provides opportunities for directing their own actions with decreasing adult support and supervision. And this next slide shows just a couple of activities. These are by far not extensive lists of activities that encourage infants to focus attention, use working memory, and practice basic self-control skills. During this stage of development, from 6 to 18 months, infants are actively developing their core executive functioning capacities. So supportive, responsive interactions with adults are the foundation for the development of these skills. However, particular activities can strengthen these key components, and these are probably things that teachers on here you're already doing in your infant toddler classrooms. Lap games, hiding games, imitation or copying games, simple role play, conversations, finger plays. And I've just listed a couple examples by far not extensive at all of what you're probably already doing, and you could probably list several under each area. And American Sign Language could be used as finger play as well. Absolutely, Marilyn, good suggestion. And in this next slide, you see executive function activities that are good for 18 to 36-month-olds. During this stage of development, 18 to 36 months, children are rapidly expanding their language skills, right? And language plays an important role in the development of executive function and self-regulation, as it helps children identify their thoughts and actions, reflect on them, and make plans that they hold in mind and use. And language also helps children understand and follow increasingly complex rules, both of those that regulate behavior and those that apply to simple games. Additionally, much like Marilyn mentioned American Sign Language, bilingualism is also associated with better executive functioning and self-regulation skills. So parents who are fluent in more than one language should use those languages with their children, and the teachers too. So in the next couple slides, I'm going to highlight just a couple of resources and application opportunities as we get into the last section of our webinar so that you can go and explore on your own. One resource that's really great that a lot of these examples came from is enhancing and practicing executive function skills with children from infancy to adolescence. And this is an activities guide for building executive functioning. It can be found in the downloaded PDF on a great resource, developing childharvard.edu, which has all kinds of resources from handouts to webinars to videos on how to support executive functioning in very easy layman's terms and layman language. The next resource I'll highlight is a resource you're probably familiar with, Ellen Dolinsky in Mind in the Making. And she refers to executive functioning skills as the 7 essential life skills. And here in this resource, you've got all kinds of videos and tips and activities and resources that support those essential life skills, including learning modules that you can practice. And finally, 0 to 3, My Home and My Workplace has tons of resources on executive functioning, on how to ameliorate or lessen the impacts of toxic stress. We also, I just highlighted one resource here that is on supporting school readiness. It's an interactive school readiness tool. You can look at how to support school readiness from birth to school entry here. The core information in the 0 to 3 resource, I just want to go back and highlight, there's video clips that show children learning these skills, what they look like in everyday interaction, parent-child activities which provide fun ideas, and you all, I mean, feel free to chat resources in the chat box too. You are your best resource for sure. And I want to just take some time for closing thoughts and comments, but I want to just share that at one level, this is all very complex stuff: neuroscience, social science, large-scale evaluation. You've seen it all and read it all, but at another, perhaps more fundamental level, it could not be more simple. It's caring for others, placing our priorities in the most human and humane order. And my friend and esteemed colleague, Walter Gilliam, told me a story early this summer about a conversation he had once with a peach farmer, and I thought I would share it with the peach state today. He asked the farmer to think about 3 stages in a peach tree's life: the time between when it's a seed and when it begins to bud, the time between the budding seed and the growing tree, and the time between the growing tree and the first fruit. And Dr. Gilliam asked the farmer, if you could have optimal weather for one of these 3 stages, the weather for the other 2 stages left totally to chance, which stage would you choose ideal weather for? Without missing a beat, apparently the farmer said the first one, because all the potential of that tree is in that seed. Now, Dr. Gilliam is one of the world's leading experts on preschool expulsion, infant toddler development, so you can imagine how he loved that answer. And he said to that farmer, and he said to the audience that day, he said, well, hot darn, you know, water that seed. So it was really exciting to hear a peach farmer share that with Walter Gilliam and confirm his what we know and what science tells us, but is so applicable to children too, as well as peaches. And I just want to take some time for some closing thoughts and comments and reflections, and I want to let you know that some references that were noted here today, and a lot of the research articles are cited here. I apologize that some are in APA format and some are not. So because it's not a dissertation chapter, I wasn't following one rule of thumb there. So thanks for your graciousness in accepting the different variation in citations. Do we have any questions or comments, ahas, concerns, or needs for clarity?
I want to encourage people to ask questions, to share your ideas, share your experiences. As you're doing that, I very much want to thank Holly for her giving us a lot of food for thought. So as we are thinking about how to share some of this information, I'd love to hear your thoughts, I'm sure Holly would as well, about how does this apply to the field or the area that you're working in. I see a few people still typing, so we'll give you a second to go ahead and share your share any of your thoughts. I see some questions about recordings. We are recording this session, as I mentioned, and it will be available on the Better Brains for Babies website within the next few days, within a week at least. Holly, I see a couple questions you might want to, or a couple ideas you might want to address. So I see some people who plan to use information with parents, with parent support groups.
Yeah, thanks, Marilyn. I was talking on mute, I found out. It definitely provides me with more insight how educators and parents need to partner with each other to support EF. And And hopefully it's really validating at the same time that what you're doing in your home visits and early intervention and the content that you're providing in your training and technical assistance, you know, it's all very complex. It's neuroscience. It's about large study evaluation studies, large scale. However, it's very fundamental in making decisions that are very humane and relationship based. And luckily, there's no need for intensive intervention. We have the most effective tool we need, which is ourselves and our relationships to offer. And that's such a hope for a future. Thanks, Marilyn, for sharing that. And Tanya said you're going to use the information in parent support groups. I see some other thank yous. It is so great to be here with all of you today, and you're doing the work on the front line, and I'm just in awe of you, and I'm in debt to you.
As you all are sharing your wrap-up comments, please join me in thanking Holly for being here with us, for sharing such good information with us.
Thank you. And Caitlin, in EI, see the large need for having consistent caretaker and a breakdown of executive functioning. Yes, continuity of care, as you can see, is largely related to supporting that executive functioning. And a consistent caretaker as well. That one pro-social, positive, caring adult and relationships and how we see those promote resilience, and also as one of the greatest contributors to executive functioning is the context of that positive relationship. And Connie says, as a CTAE-EC teacher in a high school setting, I found that my Better Brains for Babies connection very beneficial in supplementing my students' understanding. I'm so glad, and thank goodness for Better Brains for Babies. I remember attending my very first Better Brains for Babies training of trainers in 2002, and where I got to see Diane share the emerging infant brain development research, and I was hooked from day one with Diane, and then having her as a professor in the graduate program as well. So,
and can you believe we're still doing it?
I know. That's just, you know, until it's a part of every decision-making process that goes on in policy and practice, there's the need, right?
And I have to give a quick shout out to the folks at the DFACS Office of Prevention and Family Support for sponsoring Better Brains for Babies, including giving us the ability to hold this webinar today. So we very much appreciate their support that helps make these things possible.
Awesome. Susan says she'll be sharing this with CASA volunteers and DFCS caseworkers, so important as we work with children in foster care. Yes, children experiencing significant risk. And Allison says, I'm in the process of getting the Mind in the Making modules approved for right from the start, state-approved training hours. I know a little bit about that, working in the office for a while, and I'm sure that content will pass muster for the quality assurance process at right from the start. Thank you for doing that training, Allison. Thank you, Marilyn and Roxy and Charlotte. And I think, Diane, you mentioned the process about getting a certificate for participating. Some might have missed that, so if you want to mention that again.
I'm going to stop the recording at this part, and thank you again very much.